Well, hello again and welcome back to CM Kozeman's Q&A session where we answer questions received from Patreon almost a year ago. And I am recording on the 6th of November 2024. A great many changes have taken place in the world today, none of which, or almost none, have a bearing on our questions or their answers. Just to be clear, if you're a new first-time visitor, this is where subscribers to my Patreon channel can ask me questions and I answer them later on in bespoke videos like this. Think of it like super chats, but in a more time-delayed and baroque way. And I would really like everybody to support this channel on Patreon or by going to the merch store and getting yourself some nice CM Kozeman merchandise. Okay, let's go. Some more questions from Unclear Rain about surreal art. They say, where exactly do you get your inspiration for your surreal paintings? They're super interesting. Well, as most of you might know, I am a surreal artist and a painter of some repute, and my surreal paintings are more colorful and cave art-like, and usually where my illustrations are very realistic and detailed, my paintings are very crude or simplistic looking, and also I have no scientific story to tell with them. When painting, I just think, this color looks great, that shape looks good, and I try to have fun and I try to create things that people have never seen before, and I also want to create an artifact that people will find beautiful. So there is no inspiration there. I just go in, bish bash bosh. Usually the dark secret is the first 2 or 3 paintings I create in each spasm of activity is really bad and I throw it away most of the time. But that's the process. As for inspiration, usually I'm inspired by folk art, folk motifs, primitive art, or historic art from other cultures or cultures that used to inhabit my part of the world. One of my favorite sources of inspiration actually comes from Anatolian folk culture. That is to say, the very quirky, surreal, and overall strange motifs people across Turkey and the surrounding region use for their folk embroidery or to decorate worship sites or works of vernacular architecture, or even in details such as gravestones and wooden posts people make before they place their gravestones. It's a whole spectrum of really incredible and understudied folkloric art. These being said, I also take caution not to paint myself into a corner as a traditional Turkish motif artist, and on the other hand, I'm also careful not to appropriate cultures directly. There's nothing illegal about that, but it's just bad form. I mean, if you look at, for example, Aboriginal art in Australia, they have some really mind-blowing motifs and really strange creatures and spirit paintings. Obviously, like any good surrealists, they inspire me too, but I'm always very careful not to replicate an Aboriginal painting one by one. Now, there's no laws stipulating that I shouldn't do this, it's just bad form, as I just told you. If I do the entire thing in pure copycat imitation, I don't contribute anything from myself, and if I did that, I would also look kind of uninformed and dumb and idiotic, really. So I don't do that. So it's a nuanced conversation between yourself, your sources of inspiration, your own unique art style. Oh, by the way, there's this other thing you need to deal with while painting, and that obviously is the behavior of paint on paper or canvas, and that takes a long time to master. Even when you're doing relatively simple things, it really takes a long time to reach a stage where people can look at your paintings without a signature and they'll say, CM Kozeman did this, or Abby did this, or something, I don't know. So the name of the game is to digest your inspirations and spit back out something that is truly your own. And that is that. One more question from Unclear Rain. What advice would you give to someone who wants to be better at paleo art or in drawing speculative creatures? I answered this question in the previous video in this series, but I'll repeat it again. Study nature itself, look at live animals, and even if you're going to draw something totally alien, there's a certain way muscles move, there's a certain way bones move, and if you're designing an alien that's so out there it doesn't even use muscles or bone, well, there's still a way matter moves in scales, you know. You simply cannot draw something that looks like a spider and call it something that's 50 meters tall, even if the gravity was weaker. You have to really learn how physical forms exist in nature, and to that end, one of the best exercises I have is to take a video of one of your favorite creatures when it's running or hunting or jumping, make a freeze frame, just press the space key, and then draw that freeze frame. Do a lot of sketches like that to unlock your wrist. And also another tip I will keep repeating until my dying day is to use physical media. I always recommend people to sketch with a real pencil because the moves you make on paper and the little accidents of sketching really bring your sketches to life, and you really learn a lot that way. So those are my 2 tips for people who want to be better at speculative evolution. Okay, another question from Unclear Rain. When you designed the post-human creatures in All Tomorrows, were you deliberately trying to make them disturbing or uncanny? I'm curious as to how you see them as human descendants. Are they supposed to be seen as abominations? That's a good question right there. So let's unpack this. All Tomorrows is a science fiction book I wrote and illustrated when I was 18, 19, going on to 20. And it's all about the future evolution of humanity. And it's accompanied by some pretty bizarre and strange illustrations. I really did not have any idea of making them specifically uncanny, but suffice it to say, I used my knowledge of animal anatomy to make up for my inexperience in illustrating human anatomy. And if you've dabbled in art for any time, you would probably know that human anatomy is really hard to nail down. You know, you have people who are godlike in illustrating dinosaurs or fantastic creatures or birds, but when it comes to drawing people, the same artists really fumble the game. The same with me, and I think it's a really different skill to be able to illustrate human beings realistically, because you are perfectly attuned and every mistake catches your eye. So that's the risk there. And that's what I did with All Tomorrows. I just made them look more animalistic or quote-unquote alien to cover up for what I was not able to do with illustrating human beings. It really shows in All Tomorrows when you look at the picture for the Martians, who are supposed to be these more lightly built and smarter, sharper featured humans which evolve on Mars after humans colonize Mars. Long story. And you will notice that that picture is an in-universe pencil illustration of a Martian. I could not draw the Martian himself the way I wanted. I kept getting details wrong, or little things started sticking out. So at the end, I just took a very well done sketch that was executed very rapidly, and then I kind of layered over that with some textures, and I made it look like it was on a discarded piece of paper. So I played a cunning trick, but I guess it did the trick. So that's that. They are not meant to be seen as abominations, the creatures in All Tomorrows, but the art style is very particular because I was still learning a lot of things. Well, even in this day and age, I am learning a lot of things, but I had much more to learn back then. And I just kept the weirdness that resulted from my lack of experience consistent, and I tried to pass off that consistency as style. And perhaps that's what all art at the end of the day really is. Moving on to more questions, this time from Nicolas Konradsen, a longtime online fan, friend, and actually a patron of my actual surreal arts. He has been generous enough to purchase a few of my paintings, and for that I cannot thank him enough. Okay, Nicholas asks, if you were to make a movie, what would it be? A movie or perhaps a series or something? What genre would it be in? Would it be live action? And if so, who would the actors be? What kind of story? Oh man, this is a kind of question that I need at least a couple of days to prepare, even if only to answer with a concept. And I don't know if this happens to you too, but almost seasonally I get different concepts for big ideas, you know? Sometimes I feel like making a real life drama without any fantastic or surreal elements, just a real life drama about a young family who is trying to survive the transition from 2010s to the 2020s, the COVID pandemic, social unrest, economic downturn, war in the world, global uncertainty. It really does feel like the end times these days. And that project, it would maybe be a Netflix type miniseries, and it would be called The End Times, and it would be from the perspective of a young family or a young set of characters trying to stay alive in a world going mad, and the almost Harkonnen levels of callousness and cruelty and selfishness shown to them by the boomer generation, who seem to be hoarding all the wealth and nearly all the power these days. And the way they are blind and tone deaf to the suffering, in certain cases to the suffering of their own children, is really extraordinary. And I would want to make a real life telenovela kind of series about this, and it would be called The End Days, and it would be filmed in a manner similar to Netflix's The Crown, but instead of royalty we have maybe a set of characters who are young and struggling and going through these awful times. Many fantastic superhero kind of bullshit series are being made these days, but nothing, to the best of my knowledge, nothing chronicling what is actually going on. And Days, dun, 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 a mini-series by C.M. Kozeman. So I think about that a lot. During other times, I always think about making a Studio Ghibli style animated documentary about extinct life, that is to say dinosaurs, pre-dinosaurian archosaurs, prehistoric mammals, marine reptiles, pterosaurs, the lot. There are a number of these prehistoric life documentaries out there. Some of them are very good, but all of these use 3D animation, and I have nothing against 3D animation, but it has got its own limitations. It imposes a kind of straitjacket of false realism, so things always look and feel a certain way, whereas the most salient characteristics about living animals, you know, the way gazelles leap like boiling water off a hot plate, the way a snake moves, the way a fish swims, the way a bird dives, you know, these kinds of movements, you really cannot capture their essence with 3D animation. You need to have the forms change and morph in the screen. There's a famous cartoon rule. It's the rule of stretch and squash, if I'm not misremembering the names. And it was a Disney innovation. So in 2D animation, when a character jumps, the character actually physically elongates on the drawing. So a freeze frame may actually look nothing like a physical representation of that character. It would be distorted. If a character lands, it kind of like bunches down, or if it's moving really fast, sometimes its legs are drawn just as a blur. And it's in those details that 2D animation still excels, and I would really like to capture the essence of that with prehistoric animals, with some sort of a Studio Ghibli or maybe a Fantasia for the 20th century. So these are two of the many big movie projects that keep popping into my mind at certain times. Will I ever get to make them? I don't know. I actually did study filmmaking in college, if you can believe it, but that's a whole other story. Another note from Nicholas Conradsen. Also, if a fan or acquaintance from the internet is in your area of the world and offers you to buy you coffee and lunch for real, would you accept? Well, of course, my good friend. Please, you and anybody, if you ever make your way into Turkey, Istanbul or Ankara, these are two big cities in Turkey, please hit me up and we can organize a real-life meetup. I have met with my online foreign YouTube fans before in Istanbul, and they were always great meetings. Some of you might be listening. If you are, please say hi. And moving on, more questions, this time from Kai. More questions about All Yesterdays. Now, this is not All Tomorrows, this is All Yesterdays, which was a book about dinosaurs and a new way of looking at paleontology that I wrote and co-illustrated with my good friend John Conway, and then Darren Naish of the Tetrapod Zoology fame moved in and wrote the introduction. Okay, let's hear what Kai has to ask about All Yesterdays. Okay, here we go. How did the initial idea for All Yesterdays come about? What was the creative and collaborative process like? So All Yesterdays was published in 2012, but I had been friends with John Conway, who is still, I think, one of the greatest paleo artists and certainly the greatest artist depicting flying reptiles. I had been personal friends with him for a while. I was a best man at his wedding, actually. And we were always meeting together in different parts of the world, tossing ideas back and forth. And we were realizing that there were certain tropes in paleo art. We both had certain ideas we wanted to see illustrated. We visited natural history museums and we looked at actual bones and not 2D diagrams, and when you do that, you notice a lot of things. So slowly we began to build up a kind of prehistoric portfolio, a list of concepts that we would like to illustrate. At this point, we had no idea of a book, but then this portfolio took on a life of its own. I started writing it, John started illustrating it, I did a few extra illustrations, and it was a really smooth collaborative process. And this is very rare because when you're collaborating with somebody online, sometimes even if you're the best of friends and you have a high tolerance for bullshit and stuff, it still can be hard because when you're not working for money, remember we were doing this without any idea for sales or revenue, we were just trying our best, to be honest. And when you're not working for money, it's difficult to critique someone without sounding like you're ordering them or you're putting them down a peg. And with John Conway, I never had this problem, and I think we just thought alike. We don't talk as often, and that's just because life got in the way, but I still think he's one of my greatest friends in the world. So that was the collaboration. We just did images online, shared it over email, and wrote some text. And another rule of collaboration I think that everyone can learn from is to delegate agency to the person you're working with. It's really easier said than done, but imagine you are an artist, okay? And somebody is filming a documentary about you. Now imagine you also went to film school and you already made some documentaries yourself. So you have some ideas for incredible shots for the person making that documentary. So now you have a conundrum. You could either say, oh, how about we film it this way? Or how about we film it that way? Or how about you go on there like you film it? Or B, you shut the fuck up because the person filming you also knows his craft. Assume your collaborators know what they're doing, trust them, delegate stuff. Sometimes a simple, hey, this looks great, is worth more than 10,000 pages of critiques. Because remember, nobody's gonna think the same as you. You shouldn't micromanage what people are doing, especially if you're collaborating as peers. Now that can apply to art, that can apply to art books, that can apply to paleo art, but that also applies to life. Remember to trust people, delegate authority to them, and not only will you be a cooler person, but your life will be easier. It could even be something as simple as having like a housemate or roommate, or he or she is cooking. When they're cooking, don't stay in the fucking room. Let them cook. Let them cook. Because really an observer makes people act differently. So let them relax, and sometimes being a good pal means staying out of under their feet from time to time. Okay, more all yesterday's questions. Is there anything you regret including or excluding from the book? Why? I think we should have included much more stuff, to be honest, like pteropods with inflatable sacks on their faces, sauropods with inflatable necks. Now, that was a real stinger, because Prehistoric Planet had something like that. And I had an illustration like that, but I remember discarding it, thinking it would be too extraordinary or too outlandish. So yeah. If you could make all yesterdays again with what you know today, what would you change? Well, first of all, I think the book would be 500 pages long. It would involve more artists, more writers, perhaps. And maybe we would look at the dinosaur world in a clade by clade basis. So it could be things like the mysteries of the sauropods, and there you cluster all the sauropod ideas. And then you got something about tyrannosaurs and the other predatory dinosaurs. But I don't know. Maybe it's great that we made it a kind of quick and dirty 80-page book instead of a 500-page book that takes decades to complete. As John once told me, perfect is the enemy of good. And we got it out there, and that's what mattered. Okay, more about all yesterdays. Did working on this book influence your opinion and the perception of prehistory and prehistoric life? Well, of course it did, because it would have been somebody else if it hadn't been me and John Conway, but we were just in the right place at the right time, and we had a kind of mentality of if not me, then who? If not now, then when? But I think these ideas were percolating among paleontology and art enthusiasts for a while, and somebody else would have made a book like this even without us. But even with that, the effect of all yesterdays is undeniable. I think many people saw all yesterdays as a gateway to a broader view of paleontology in general. And right after publishing all yesterdays in 2013, we published a follow-up volume called All Your Yesterdays, based on fan art sent by various people around the world, inspired by the original All Yesterdays. And among the quote-unquote fans submitting work for this book were names that are giants now. People such as Joshua Knuppe, who's a really well-esteemed paleo artist, or John Mezzaros, and many others. So I think we really struck gold there, or we were lucky at that particular time with that particular book. As for me personally, I think working on All Yesterdays enabled me to think about dinosaurs as more than just units or schematic, skeletal creatures surrounded by a white void. It gave me an appreciation of these things as organisms existing in an ecosystem surrounded by other organisms, plants, landscapes, and I think that level of appreciation is very hard to develop without paleo art to guide you. So there. One more question from Kai. Modern science can influence paleo art as new discoveries and conclusions are available. In what ways do you think paleo art influences paleontological research? I think it has a great deal of influence subconsciously and sometimes overtly too. There's a certain little hypothesis, for example, called the RPR hypothesis, that is to say, the raptor prey restraint hypothesis, which postulates that dinosaurs like Velociraptor or Deinonychus use their giant slashing foot claws not to slash at big prey animals, but to squeeze the life out of mid-sized or smaller prey animal species. And this hypothesis, I think, was first popularized by paleo art, and then they built up a kind of scientific theory around it, and I don't know its validity at the time of recording, but still it's a clear-cut case of paleo art influencing actual paleontology. Okay, more questions from Kai, this time about art itself. Here's one. What are your biggest inspirations when doing art? What do you think about? Capturing specific emotions or telling a story? I usually don't have any big stories to tell in single pictures, but in case of speculative evolution art or creature art, I do focus a little on the world which might be behind that picture. But usually I just want to illustrate concepts. And when it comes to surreal art, I think I just answered that question before in this very podcast. I want to make beautiful, wonderful, strange things that people will enjoy looking at, and things which will carry my signature even without an actual written signature on the bottom of the painting. So there's that. One more question from Kai. How do you think your view of prehistoric life differs from the average non-scientific person? That's easy. I think I am, compared to the average non-scientific person, I'm very well versed on paleontological facts, paleontological discoveries, and also on the anatomy and behaviors of living organisms. And that enables me to portray dinosaurs and extinct animals as real-life creatures and not monsters or dragons or things from Jurassic World. Now, the question goes on. How is your view of prehistoric life different from that of a paleontologist? Well, I think there, maybe being slightly less informed makes me more daring, and that allows me to put silly ideas out there, which in time may actually be proven right, almost. Remember, I have a few accurate predictions that came true. The most famous of these was Venatoraptor, which is a discovery made a few years ago of a small, lightweight animal that's very close to the split of the Archosaur family tree between dinosaur ancestors and pterosaur ancestors. Now, years ago, I had made a completely speculative illustration of a hypothetical earliest ancestor of all theropod dinosaurs, all sauropods, all ornithischians, and all pterosaurs. And I just randomly looked at the skulls of all of these earliest forms. And when you do that, there are some really weird convergences. For example, the earliest pterosaurs have very well differentiated teeth, almost like that of a mammal. In fact, one of the earliest known pterosaurs is called Eudimorphodon, which means well differentiated two-form teeth. Now, what else has similar teeth? The earliest ornithischians. There's this animal known as Heterodontosaurus, and weirdly, that thing also has strange teeth that are kind of small and incisorial forward, and behind its mouth it has more crushing teeth. And there's even I don't even know what it is, but like a very early theropod. I need to check this, wait. Alright, I checked it, yes, they say it, a possible theropod dinosaur called Daemonosaurus, which also has small teeth on the front of its snout and bigger teeth further back. So I looked at all the skulls of these animals and tried to draw a sort of earliest ancestor. And the thing I came up with resembled Venatoraptor to an unnerving degree. If you want to learn more about this creature and my quote-unquote prediction, go look at the other videos in my channel. There's a whole video about predicting Venatoraptor right there. And I think I have a similar prediction in the making, and I'll just go on record about having made it. Nothing about this is verified yet, but remember how they discovered smaller Spinosaurus fossils with fins on their tails as well? And there was a big commotion. Now everybody was updating their Spinosaurus illustrations to add almost newt-like fins on their big tails. Well, I think those smaller tails with the fins on them belong to something else. And the actual big Spinosaurus, whatever that was, is another species, if not another genus entirely. The evidence connecting them is very scant, and I personally suspect that Spinosaurus, as we come to know it, is a chimera. And let's see how history proves me. Maybe I'll make another Daddy Kozuman was so fucking right video just for them. So yeah. And one last question for Kai. What is your most controversial paleo art or paleontology related opinion or idea? Well, it might be that Spinosaurus chimera thing I just told you. Or I have a deeper and more pervasive hunch. And that's basically, I suspect we don't know shit about a lot of things. We have more remains, more spectacular fossils, and don't get me wrong, the amount of information we have on the evolution, the cladistics, and the habitats of fossil animals is extensive. But on a lot of levels, we just don't know shit. And all the paleontology you read and accept as canon is made by actual people with careers and sometimes with desperate needs to advance those careers. Once again, I'm thinking about Spinosaurus and Mr. Sereno and Mr. Nizar, who won't stop beating that dead horse. But it's not them particularly. I think when something becomes your career, you feel a drive to make discoveries, and the discoveries need to get bigger and bigger, and that's just how the primate or male human mind operates. And I think we have clocked up a lot of those accumulations in the past, and I think there will be a big reappraisal of almost everything we know about paleontology in the mid-term future. Now, this may be a bit complicated, but I'm saying that you will need to go and look back at all the science and the papers and the fossils that were collected and described from the dinosaur renaissance onwards, so from the 1980s onwards. And if people examine these things closer, I'm sure there's gonna be a whole lot of other similarities or outright mistakes that nobody noticed. And also remember, the number of people who can study these things at detail is surprisingly low. So at some level, you're tied to the consensus of a small level of experts. And things might be radically different if they are re-evaluated. Now, I'm not saying anything like, the flood is gonna be proven to be true, or like, creationists use these tactics too. I'm saying nothing of the sort. All I'm saying is that the relationships, the evolutionary cladograms which we have taken to heart may be drastically wrong. And I'll just leave it at that. And those were the dinosaur related questions from Kai and everyone else. And man, these questions are really insightful, but they take a long time to answer. And that's that for today's stream. I hope you enjoyed my answers to your questions. Once again, if you want to ask more questions, the links are all below. And if you enjoyed my informed ramblings, I would be happy if you could support me on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. And that is that. Have a nice day, everybody. Goodbye, and I love you all.